Good morning, everyone. There are 6 people in this giant room, plus me, so hopefully a couple of people are on Zoom. If you don't know me, my name's Nick Runch, and this year I did the Tour Divide race from Banff, Alberta to Antelope Wells, New Mexico. A little background on, me and doing the Tour Divide. So I've been doing kind of long distance, mostly road riding for the last 10 years. And I don't know when exactly I heard about the Tour Divide, but it was quite a while ago, probably about 10 years ago. And I've been wanting to do it every year since. And, I always come up with some excuse not to do it because you got to take a lot of time off. And, it's hard to get time off work, but this year I was like, all right, I'm gonna do it. I work at a bike company. Like, I might as well do this big bike race. Like, it just makes sense. So I was able to get the time off thanks to Mark and my former boss Guy, and made it happen, which was really exciting. So this first slide is just an intro, but the picture is in New Mexico, and this is basically how it was all the time. Either raining or I could see a big thunderstorm in the distance. So this year was especially wet. Usually there's a lot of wildfires in Tour Divide, so you got to worry about smoke, which I did not have to worry about smoke this year, which was kind of a blessing because I was actually able to finish. So first I'll go through the route. So like I said, it goes from Banff, Alberta to Antelope Wells, New Mexico. This year, the route was about 2,600 miles. There was actually a little bit of a detour in New Mexico due to forest fires that were happening at the start of the ride. By the time I got to New Mexico, the fires were out, which was nice. So usually the route is closer to 2,700 miles. I ended up riding 2,700 miles, but this year it was 2,600 miles. The route has about 150,000 feet of climbing, which seems like a lot, but really like the climbing per mile on the route is not super crazy. It's really only the big mountain passes that have most of the climbing. It's not, and they're not, constant. So, in terms of climbing, it's a lot, but it's not too crazy. And then the route is about 70% unpaved, and about 30% paved. By distance, by time, it's probably about 90% unpaved because you're going a lot faster on the paved sections. So here are kind of my ride stats. So my total race time was 22 days and 52 minutes. If you look at my track leader's time, it's a bit longer, but I had dropped my spot tracker, and it finished with another rider later in that day. So luckily, he found it. It wasn't like buried in a river or something, because I think that's where it came off, like in a river going through the road. My total distance was just over 2,700 miles, so I ended up riding about 100 miles extra. I'll tell you some of that discrepancy a little bit later. So my daily average was just over 117 miles. My shortest days, I had 2 45-mile days, and my longest day was 188 miles on the second to last day. My total elevation was 168,000 feet, so daily average was 7,300. And then my total moving time was 243 and a half hours, which is a lot. I was on the bike a lot, so 10 and a half hours a day. And that's like riding time. That's not just, start the ride at this time and end the ride at that time. That's like pedaling time. So it was a lot of riding bikes. This is the bike I rode. This was a Specialized S-Works Epic Hardtail. And thanks to Brian Gordon and Miles Hubbard for getting me this frame. It ended up being a pretty ideal setup. A lot of people ride rigid bikes, like the Salsa Cutthroat accounts for, 30 to 40% of like everyone who does this, the bike they ride. But there are a few things about this bike specifically that are quite a bit different than a Cutthroat, and that I think make this a much better bike for Tour Divide. Two of the big ones are I had a suspension fork, so I had 100 millimeter travel SID SL Ultimate Brain fork, which did really well. There were times when it got totally clogged with mud and stopped working, and I could definitely feel the difference, and definitely liked having some suspension, whereas a lot of people don't have any. I also had 2.3-inch tires on 30 millimeter, or I think 29 millimeter rims, which is a little bit bigger than most people use. A lot of people use 2.1s, but I think having just that little extra volume just made it more comfortable and more manageable, just because it's like such a long ride, and it's pretty rough terrain. So some gear highlights included the Mers custom frame bag. So Jesse Mers, who works here in the test lab, he mentioned to me that he wanted to start making like frame packs and other bike bags, and I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like, I need a frame pack. I'm doing, this ride on this Epic. So he made a custom bag like specific to the Epic hardtail. And it ended up being one of the best pieces of gear on the whole ride. Like, it had basically no issues. And then I had an Apidura hydration bladder. So you can see the frame bag has two zippers, one on the top, one on the bottom. So that bottom compartment in there is a 3-liter hydration bladder, and then in the picture you can see like a hose coming up just behind the head tube. So that was the hose for the bladder. So it made it really nice. I never had to like reach for bottles or deal with any of that. I could just grab the hose, which was really cool. I used the SRAM Axis drivetrain, which I wasn't too sure about. I had never really used wireless shifting at all before, and I'm generally not one to go for like new things super quickly, but I wanted to run a 10 to 52 cassette, but also drop bars. So there were a few like, kind of sketchy ways to do it, but this seemed like the most legit way, doing road levers and the mountain bike derailleur. And it ended up being like totally flawless, like no issues. The derailleur and the hubs were submerged in water like several times throughout the ride, and it really never had any issues. I ended up bringing 3 ETAP batteries, and each one lasted about a day and a half, but I had yeah, not very long. but I had a charger that I could just plug into the dynamo hub. So Victor built me some Revol Control Carbon wheels, and I had an SP dynamo front hub. So that hub powered my lights as well as a sine wave reactor USB charger. So I actually had a USB charger as my top cap, like my stem cap, that I could plug directly into, which made it super nice for charging my Wahoo, my phone, ETAP batteries, basically everything. And it worked super well. My handlebars were another highlight. I had P&W Coast 52 centimeter bars, so really wide drop bars, and I am in love with wide drop bars. I rode my gravel bike, which has 44 centimeter bars, on Saturday, and it just doesn't feel right anymore. I need the width, and as a bonus, the wide bars make it so you can fit a big wide handlebar bag, which is nice. So there is a link to the full build and all my gear. I can share this slideshow somehow. It's just on my blog. I just wrote the whole list of gear if you're interested. I only had a few gear issues, which was nice. I didn't really have too many problems. So I had 2 flats total, which over that long of a ride is pretty impressive. The tires I used were Specialized Renegade T5 Grid, which I don't think are made in production, but Brian Gordon was generous enough to get me some prototypes, and they were great. So yeah, I got 2 flats, fixed both with Dynaplugs, and yeah, basically had no issues. I had 1 broken spoke at 1,700 miles. So this day I had ridden Boreas Pass from Silverthorne, Colorado, and the descent of this pass was a 4-mile section of single track that was pretty rocky. So, you know, I didn't hear the spoke break or anything, but I continue riding, and then I just happened to look down at my rear wheel, and I could see like a wobble in it. So I stopped, and there was a broken spoke. Luckily, Victor built these wheels so I could use only 1 spoke length for front and rear, drive side and non-drive side, which was pretty ideal. So I had 3 extra spokes. It was also a DT hub, so I could just pull off the whole free hub body. I didn't have to, you know, have any tools. And yeah, replaced the spoke, no issue. But then I started riding, and 2 minutes later, I hear a crack, like a very concerning crack. And I noticed that my saddle is no longer, you know, fixed in place. It could move, and it started dropping. So I get off the bike, and I find that my seat post clamp is cracked. And I was like, oh shit. Like I was pretty worried because I was 63 miles from Salida, where I was going that day, 50 miles from Breckenridge, just in the middle of nowhere on a gravel road. So my first solution is this middle picture here. So I put a zip tie on the seat post just above the seat post clamp, like at my seat post height, and then wrapped a bunch of Gorilla Tape above the zip tie to try to prevent it from sliding. And I ended up riding like that for about 26 miles, and it worked surprisingly well. I didn't really put most of my weight on the saddle. I kind of stayed in the aero bars and was kind of lifting up or standing, but it worked well enough. But then I stopped in this little town, got some food, started riding again, and then I had a much better idea. I was using a Specialized Burra Burra seat pack, thanks to Doug Russell. There was a lot of borrowed gear on this ride. So yeah, I was using Doug's Burra Burra, and it has a stabilizer bar with a clamp on the seat post. So I had a seat post clamp. So I took that out, lowered it down, put it on top of the broken clamp, and the saddle could still move, like rotate side to side, but it was fixed in place, so I could put my full weight on it. So I rode like that for the next 46 miles, which were a really terrible 46 miles. So I'm glad I was able to make it work. Yeah, I went through 2 sets of brake pads front and rear. What I didn't put on here is they were metallic brake pads. So due to all the mud and everything, like the brakes went pretty quickly. Yeah, I actually had to get a new rear rotor as well because I had gone through the pad material into the metal on the, I guess, carrier of the pad. So, yeah, that was all right, but, you know. And then one completely wrecked drivetrain. Everything about the drivetrain is fully worn. The chain is gone. The chain ring is destroyed. You can see the teeth on the cassette are like totally shark tooth. So right now it all kind of works, but if I were to replace any part, all of it would have to be replaced. And then yeah, mud destroying everything all the time. There's a lot of mud on this route this year in particular. Yeah, I'll show a picture in a few slides. There were a few sections of what's referred to as peanut butter mud. So it's mud that you can you have to push the bike through. You cannot ride the bike, and even pushing the bike, you can only get 5 feet before the mud builds up, and you can't. The wheels won't even spin. So I ended up carrying probably an 80-pound bike a few times for a few miles. Those were the only times I really questioned what I was doing during the ride. Like why am I doing this? So let's move on. All right, so I'm just gonna go through the different sections of the ride, basically by region. So the ride started in Banff, Alberta. Banff is a national park, so it's a little bit different than the national parks in the U.S. if you've never been. So Banff is actually a town within the national park. So It was pretty cool being there because I did the grand depart for this ride, and there were about 170 people signed up. So just being in the town for the few days beforehand, there were riders everywhere. You got to see, everyone's bikes, talk to a lot of different riders about their setups, their rides, whether they'd done this before. It seemed like this was a lot of people's first time, including mine, doing Tour Divide, which is pretty cool. So yeah, just being in Banff and around all those people was really cool. Yeah, rain, mud, and snow. That was the theme of the whole ride, as I've alluded to several times. The first 5 days of the ride, everything was wet, like the whole time. I camped every night in my tent, and I'd get up in the morning, just throw the wet tent in the bag. Mark, you had the idea or the suggestion of dry compression sacks. I got some of those in Banff. Those were key for sure. Yeah. So I kept my sleeping bag in one and my clothes in one. So at least the down sleeping bag stayed dry the whole time, 'cause you don't want that to get wet, especially 'cause it was pretty cold. Yeah, and then I'd say the other highlight / lowlight of Canada was a pass called Coco Claims. So this is actually the first pass of the whole route on day one, and I think it was actually the steepest pass on the whole route. So the bottom right picture shows another rider on his way to one of the climbs, and like it was just insanely steep. Like 20%, there were loose rocks on a lot of it, so like riding was out of the question. You had to just push your bike through snow, through rocks. There was just all sorts of crazy stuff. So yeah, I think they put that as the first climb to kind of weed people out, because that is not in this route. Tour Divide uses a slightly different route. There's a route called the Great Divide Mountain Bike Route, which is like a touring route. Tour Divide is slightly different, and they make it a little bit harder. I think I don't know, just 'cause it's a race and they want to make it brutal. And then like the top right picture, that's one of the other passes. That's like a 90s Chevy Blazer. And keep in mind this is June, so there's still 4 or 5 feet of snowpack there. So the first probably dozen passes of the route, you'd get to snow like that and just have to walk for 3 or 4 miles for a few hours. So it was pretty brutal. The picture on the top left is the first single track section on the route. Luckily, it was not all like that, but that just shows one of the pretty muddy sections. I think when I took this picture, I had stopped because I had like fallen into a mud hole, like almost gone over the bars. So then I was like, well, might as well stop and take a picture. And then the bottom left, that's the road. That's not a river. Like that is the road. So luckily there was this kind of sandbar thing. For some reason I thought it was a good idea to take off my shoes to cross this part, but immediately after I had to go through another one. So yeah, it didn't matter. And yeah, I was using the Specialized Rime 2.0 shoes, which I would highly recommend. My only complaint is that they retain water quite a bit. Like they were just wet all the time. But probably any shoe would have been like that. So yeah, that was Canada. From there we went into Montana. Again, the theme was rain, mud, and snow, despite the pictures, which are all dry. Yeah, so kind of one of the highlights of Montana was Red Meadow Pass, which I think was the first pass in Montana after coming over the border from Canada. So Red Meadow Pass, I think I had done a fairly long day. So I get to the base of the pass, and it was not raining at this point, and I knew there would be a big kind of snow traverse over the summit of the pass. So it was about 9 p.m. when I got to the base, and I was planning on just doing it, knowing that I would get to Whitefish, which is the next town, probably around 2 a.m. But I knew it was going to rain the next morning, so I didn't want to wait until the morning and do it in the rain. But I come across these 4 guys who are like, they already set up camp. And keep in mind, at 9 p.m. it's still light out because we're so far north, and it was right around the solstice. So sunset was like after 10 p.m., which is pretty wild. But yeah, I come upon these 4 guys who are already like, they already have camp set up, and I'm like, I think I'm gonna go over the pass, and they're like, oh no, that's a bad idea. Like, we heard it's 5 hours just through to the snow, so you won't get to Whitefish until like 4 a.m. And I was like, okay. So I stopped and camped, and then by the time I got up in the morning, everyone else was gone already, and it was probably 6 a.m. But but everyone else is gone, and it's pouring rain, and yeah, I had to do this pass, probably 4 or 5 miles of snow. It was like a 3-hour hike while it was raining and like 30 degrees, so that was pretty fun. And then yeah, descended, eventually got to Whitefish. Luckily I had enough enough layers for my core, and I had a really good rain jacket, but my hands and feet were freezing. So I bought some better rain gear in Whitefish before moving on, but that was an interesting one. And then also my tracker died. So I borrowed a spot tracker, or like rented one. I don't own one. And I got to Whitefish after all that rain, and I noticed it was dead. So I figured, okay, the batteries are dead. So I pick up some new batteries, put them in, and it turns on, it pings like 1 time, and I keep riding thinking it's fine. And then I get to the next town, which is Columbia Falls. It was only like 12 miles later, and I noticed the tracker is not on again. So I replaced the batteries again, and it still didn't work. I guess it had gotten like too much water in it, which is kind of crazy because the spot trackers are meant to be in pretty extreme weather. But I guess this was a bit too extreme even for the spot. So I call a spot. They don't really help. And then I emailed the race director, Matthew. If you've seen the Ride the Divide documentary, he like wins in that in the year that was on, and now he's like the race director. I'll say that in quotes because yeah, it's a very, very unorganized race. Yeah, I email him, and he says to put it in like a Ziploc bag with uncooked rice. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I have that, of course. So, of course, I didn't have that. So I was just riding without a tracker for a while. My mom was very, very concerned. But, you know, what are you going to do? One of the other highlights of Montana as a whole, really, was the people. I'm from Minnesota, so I grew up with like Minnesota nice, but it's always a little bit fake there, right? There's like Adam, you probably know. It's it's like people are nice, but you know, it's like surface level, and then they talk about you behind your back afterward. But like in Montana, these people were like truly nice, super generous. It was incredible. Like I would come into a place at like 9 p.m. after the kitchen had closed, and be like, "Do you have any food?" And they're like, "Yeah, we can cook you a frozen pizza." And I was like, "Yes, yes, please." And they did. It was amazing. Like, yeah, people were incredible. And then I got a very swollen Achilles, which, having watched Ride the Divide, the documentary after, I realized that's a pretty common thing, but I didn't expect it. I didn't know it was going to happen. So I guess from all the hike-a-bike, especially in the cold, your Achilles swell up. So my left Achilles tendon got very swollen. I actually met a guy in, I think, Wise River, Montana, a French-Canadian guy. He ended up scratching because like he couldn't deal with his like swollen and painful Achilles. So it was pretty bad. But now it's healed, and I finished, so whatever. Yeah, and I'll just go through the pictures. So I really like this rock. It says the world was ending. So yeah, I thought that was cool. And then the picture on the top right is at Holland Lake Lodge. This was right before Richmond Pass, which ended up being probably the pass with the most exposure. And this was the first day that I did a short day, so I only did 45 miles. I get to this lodge at like 2 p.m. but I was so cold and so wet that I just had to stop. Um, there was a woman who's not in the picture. She had actually attempted the pass that day, like the day that I got there, and she got a half mile from the summit and had to turn around because she was worried she was going to get hypothermia. So I'm really glad I didn't continue on. And yeah, so there were probably 10 of us there. They had really good food, really good. It ended up being like dinner and breakfast were included with the stay. It was really expensive, but you know, it was worth it, I think. And then we ended up doing that pass the day before, and it had rained all night and melted a bunch of the snow. So that was cool. TJ. Uh huh. Yeah. So TJ asked if I had planned like rest days. My initial plan going into the route, or my goal was 30 days to finish in 30 days and take like 2 full rest days where I wouldn't ride at all. But basically on day 1, I decided to treat it more like a race and less like a just like a ride. So I decided like basically to take no rest days. I mailed back my stove. Like I had brought a stove. I mailed that back in Whitefish along with like extra clothes that I didn't need. So all that to say, no, like it wasn't planned as a short day. It was just like the weather was so bad, and I knew this pass was coming, that it ended up being a short day. And then the other short day I had, was the last day. So yeah, it was just to the finish. Um, yeah. And then this picture on the bottom left, I think, is after that pass, the Richmond Pass. So after I had stayed in that lodge, it was just a really cool section with some double track. The route was mostly just gravel road, so it was cool when you came across double track, and there was a little bit of single track too. And then the bottom right's just a picture from, I don't know, some pass, the view. There were a lot of passes, so it's hard to keep them all, in track. Part 3, Idaho and Wyoming. Idaho's got a special place in my heart. I lived there. That was the first place in the West that I had lived. So I grew up in Minnesota, went to college in Iowa, and did an internship in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and I just loved it there. And that's kind of what brought me west. So the Idaho section was only 1 day, but it was a really cool day. So rain, mud, hail, and snow. You got the added hail. There was a lot of hail in Idaho. So some of the highlights of this were Togwotee Pass. Apparently that's pronounced Togwotee, not Togwotee. Togwotee Pass was interesting. The bottom right picture shows the mud and then the snow, and I've actually got a video on the next slide of the snow. It was pretty wild. So I was riding with another guy named Jeremiah at this point, and we had done, I think, a fairly long day, and then we come to this pass, Togwotee Pass, and we start on this kind of dirt road section. It was kind of demoralizing because it paralleled the paved road, and we could see the paved road sometimes, but you got to follow the route. So we're on this just mud road in the snow, and I'll show the next slides of video. So it ended up snowing quite a bit. This was on June 20th, by the way. So this is the day before the summer solstice, and it just felt like the middle of the winter. It was pretty wild. So Jeremiah took this video. Yeah, it was a lot. Not only that, so after that section, eventually we get back to the pavement and climb to the top of the pass on pavement. And Jeremiah was ahead of me, and I guess he thought the route just continued on the pavement, and we were staying at a lodge at the bottom of this pass. So he just continued on the pavement. But I looked at my GPS, and no, it was not on the pavement. So I turn off onto the dirt that the route was on, or that the route followed. And That section of dirt ended up being probably the worst section of the whole ride. First, it was just a bunch of snow, like packed snow, so I had to get off the bike and walk over the snow. But then it ended up being like 2 miles of that peanut butter mud. Um, and again, I could basically see the paved road while I was on this. So for probably an hour and a half, I'm like kind of walking my bike, kind of carrying my bike through this mud, just questioning what I'm doing. But at the same time, I'm not in any real danger. So I'm like, what am I going to do? Press my SOS button? Like, I'm just on this road. Like, I'm not dying. And eventually, the gravel road became more like an actual maintained road, and it got better. And then I got to this lodge, Lava Mountain Lodge. If they're watching, I'm gonna provide some criticism, and maybe they can improve. So I get to this lodge at 8 p.m. and Jeremiah had been there for like 2 hours because he took the pavement. And the first thing I say to him is like, "You missed the worst part of the whole ride," and he's like, "Oh." Um, and I figured at 8 p.m. they have a restaurant and bar. I figured I'd be able to get food, but they were closing at 8 p.m. Luckily, Jeremiah had gotten me some food, so he gives me some food. We paid $100 for a cabin with two bunk beds, so 4 beds total, and a table. And I was like, "Oh, sweet! I'll be able to take a shower," because there was a separate bathroom we could use. So I go over to the bathroom, put in the code, go in. The showers are coin operated. We paid $100 for this room, and we have to put quarters in the shower. Like, come on. And then I kind of wanted to do laundry, but no one ever gave us the code to the laundry room, so we couldn't even get in there. So that was pretty disappointing, especially after the long day. So Lava Mountain Lodge, I wouldn't recommend unless they make improvements. 0 stars, yeah. Yeah, so a few pictures. Someone had put up this Tour Divide sign on it's actually a pass on the border between Montana and Idaho. So I thought that was pretty cool. Took a picture with it. The picture on the top right, I can't remember where exactly that was, but it was just super beautiful. I think that's the Snake River. And we just rode along it, kind of descending parallel to the river for a long time. I think on an old railroad route, so it was like a very steady grade descent, super beautiful. And then the bottom left, is the Great Basin. So this was a big day. The Great Basin goes from Pinedale, Wyoming to Wamsutter, Wyoming. Wamsutter is right on I-80. And apparently it's a big make or break point for a lot of people on Tour Divide because you're just out in the middle of nowhere. It's fully exposed. You can see in the picture there are no trees, so there's no shade. It's often really, really hot. Luckily, we got a really good day, so I think it never got above 75 degrees. We had basically a tailwind all day, so it was a 140-mile day, which was kind of long, but it ended up really not being too bad. And on that day, at mile, I think 45, we stopped at this super tiny town, maybe 30 people, called Atlantic City. Pretty good name for a tiny town. And went to this little bar. What was it called? Miner's Grub Steak. I have no idea what that means. Grub steak is one word. Steak is S-T-A-K-E. So I don't know. But yeah, we go there, and I ended up talking to the owner for a while. And she grew up in Los Gatos. Her grandparents were from Santa Cruz. I live in Santa Cruz. So she ended up spending a lot of her childhood in Santa Cruz. Her grandfather helped build the Big Dipper, which is the old wooden roller coaster at the boardwalk. And then I learned her grandparents are buried at the cemetery that is literally next to my house. It was wild. So small world. Yeah, meeting someone who's totally local where I live in the middle of Wyoming. It was pretty cool. Yeah. That's Wyoming and Idaho. I went through Colorado. and eventually got to New Mexico, where there wasn't any snow. Maybe there was hail, but there's definitely a lot of rain and a lot of mud. So I learned that New Mexico has a monsoon season. So between July and September, it basically thunderstorms every day. But the infrastructure in New Mexico is not set up like it rains at all. Like it's set up like California's infrastructure, like no rain. So there were a lot of spots like this. This is just a paved road, like a somewhat, large paved road. But maybe 50 feet before this, there's a road closed sign. I just went around it. And then this ended up being, this is probably 40 feet wide, and like a foot deep with like 8 inches of loose sand. So, so I had to walk through it carrying the bike. My feet or my shoes just got full of sand. In New Mexico, I started just sleeping anywhere. Before that, I was kind of like sleeping in my tent, mostly in like kind of camping areas, but in New Mexico, that all went out the window. I just slept wherever. So the top right picture is in a town called Cuba, New Mexico. It's like behind a middle school or something. And yeah, I just set up my tent. Um, yeah, and it ended up being fine. I never got in trouble, so it was fine. The night after this, I slept like on top of a picnic table in a picnic ground where no camping was allowed, but who cares? As long as you get in past sunset and leave before sunset, you're fine. The bottom left picture is also in Cuba. I got there right around sunset, and that was pretty cool. You might be able to see, I don't know if this has a laser. It does, but you can't see it. There's like a car like in the ground on the near the bottom of the picture. I don't know how that works, but that was pretty cool. And then New Mexico's the end. So that was the border. Antelope Wells is literally just a border. There's nothing else there. Yeah, and then New Mexico has, along with sleeping everywhere, I started doing a lot longer days as well. So I really, just wanted to like push to the finish, and there was a reroute at one point due to peanut butter mud, but the communication on Tour Divide is very lacking. So I get to the section and I just rode the original route because no one had told me not to. And then I get like a bunch of messages after I finish it being like, "Oh my God, you did the original route? Like, was it all muddy?" And when I had ridden it, it was dry, which was good. But apparently, like 2 days before, it had been total mud, and there was a reroute. And I guess people learned about the reroute by going on the Facebook page and looking at some comments on some posts. So legit. And then I ended up riding the original route the next day too. Like there was kind of an S around the original route. That was the reroute, but the reroute was all paved, and I didn't want to do that. And I figured it would be dry enough, and it ended up being dry enough. So only the guy who won, Sophian, and I did the original route. So I'm just gonna say I got second place, even though I didn't. Yeah, and then this was another fun part. So one of the reasons my distance is longer than the actual route distance is I did 40 miles out and back. So I had met this woman, Katie, and we had stayed together in this little town, Glenwood, New Mexico. And the store in Glenwood didn't open until 9 a.m. the next day, which is way too late. You don't want to stay in a town. You don't want to start riding, at 9 a.m. So I had mapped out a gas station 30 miles down the route, and we just went there in the morning. We left fairly early, and it was all paved to get to this gas station. So we get to the gas station, and we both have text messages from the race director being like, "Hey, is everything okay? You're way off route." And I was just like, "Oh no." And Katie was pretty mad, but she took it well. Katie was 21, by the way, and she's a total badass. She finished like at the same time as me. This was her first long bike packing event. So yeah, she was awesome. But yeah, so then we had to ride 20 miles back on the pavement. Luckily, it was paved. and then do a big gravel climb and a gravel descent. So we had planned on finishing that day, but due to my error, and she had actually seen that I had gone past a turn, but she figured I knew what I was doing. Little did she know, I had no idea. So what happened is I had version 1 of the route on my GPS, and there was a version 2, but I didn't know that. So, yeah, is that it? Oh, yeah, and then the finish. So on that long day, I had, that was a brutal day. So, yeah, we did that reroute thing. That's also when this big river crossing was. And then there was a long paved climb to the last kind of town in the route, which was Silver City, New Mexico. Katie and I weren't really riding together, but we kind of met up in Silver City, got some food, and then kept going. Eventually, we got to another gravel section, and we could see this just massive thunderstorm in the distance. And we were like, oh, God, because, the sun was going down at this point. It's probably like 8 p.m. But, what are you going to do? You just got to keep going. So we keep going, and the thunderstorm had passed by the time we got there, luckily. But the road was really wet, so we're riding through just wet gravel. Luckily, it was not peanut butter mud. And yeah, there's a lot of like wet gravel, and then we crossed Interstate 10, and the last gravel section of the whole route, or the last off-road section, was this like 8-mile frontage road on Interstate 10. That was one of the worst roads of the whole route, and they threw it in right at the end. So it was just this like deep mud, these huge puddles that you're like walking through mud just to get through. So I get to the other side of that, and then I look at track leaders, and I realize that my dot is before this frontage road. I reach back, and my tracker's gone. So it had fallen off somewhere. There were also a bunch of like arroyos going through the road, so I'd just be riding along, and it's night, and then I'd like suddenly do like a foot drop into loose sand and like have to ride through this loose sand through like a river sometimes. So I think on one of those my tracker had fallen off, but I was not about to go back on that frontage road to grab the tracker. Let's see, where are we? Oh, Colorado. Okay. So yeah, and then after that frontage road, it was paved, and I had texted this guy there's a guy, Jeffrey Sharp. He is the best. He lives in this tiny little town that's 45 miles from the finish, and without him, the logistics of this would be impossible at the end. So he picks you up at the finish, brings you back. He lives in this little town. You can take a shower. He's got a bunch of bike boxes. It's great. So I had texted him being like, hey, I'm going to stay in this town this night. Is there somewhere I can sleep? And he said, you can stay at my place, the store. I had no idea what that meant. So I go to the one store in town, try the door. It's like 1:30 in the morning. The door's locked. So then I like keep riding a little bit. I got chased by it was the first time I got chased by a dog on the whole route, like basically the last day, which was kind of wild. The dog goes away. And then I go by this community center thing, and I knew you could sleep at this community center. So I see this concrete pad outside next to the building, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So I just set up my pad, set up my sleeping bag on the pad, and just go to sleep. And then in the morning, I see there are just bugs everywhere and tarantulas all over, and I was like, oh, man, cool. Glad I slept outside. And then I really had to go to the bathroom, like first thing in the morning. I had only slept like 3.5 hours. So I go around the building and just, no businesses are open that time. And I'm in a town, so I can't just go in a field, wherever. So I try the door of the community center. Of course, it's open. So I could have gone in there the night before, but yeah, I didn't even try it. So I go in there and, go to the bathroom and then just rode to the end. Now let's go back to Colorado. Oh, yeah, Colorado. Colorado is definitely the highlight, or one of the big highlights of the route. That picture on the bottom middle shows what happens with the peanut butter mud and why my suspension stopped working several times when that happened. And this is literally after like 3, 4, 5 feet of pushing the bike through this stuff. Like, it is wild. it also sticks to your shoes like that. So yeah, it's fun stuff. Yeah, Colorado is really cool. So my first point there is generous strangers. I said about how people in Montana were super nice and cool, but really it was the whole route. Um, so after I had broken my seat post clamp, that happened in Colorado. Um, I was just like, trying to figure out what to do, and this woman just pulls up and she's like, "Oh, are you okay? Like, do you need anything?" And I was like, I'm fine. I can ride the bike. It's not, fully broken." And I kind of told her what was wrong, and then she drives away. And then as I'm riding, like half an hour later, I see her truck coming back from the opposite direction, and she holds a seat post out of the window, and I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like, she like grabbed a seat post from her bike, like thinking that's what was broken on my bike, and like brought it back all the way from her house to like try to help me out. And I was just like, "Oh my god!" Like, I was so thankful. Like, obviously it wasn't what I needed, but but like, yeah, it was just like so generous. And then later that day, this other woman like came up upon me and like asked if I needed any food or any help or anything, which is super nice. And then even later in that day, there was another section of peanut butter mud after this super long, like 3% gravel climb and then a descent. There were like 2 miles of peanut butter mud. So I'd gotten through that, and I was trying to put my chain back on the chain ring. It just wouldn't stay on. I would just spin the pedals once and it would fall off. So I'm there like struggling, and then these people pull up, this couple, and they're like, "Do you need any help? Do you need any food or water?" And I was like, I could use some food if you have any." So they gave me like this big pepperoni stick and like a piece of cake, which was great. And I'm at the bottom of a pass. So there was one last pass to get to Salida, Colorado. And you could see a thunderstorm coming in. It was like 8:30 p.m. And they're like, "Are you concerned?" And I was like, not really. Like, at this point I was so used to the weather and everything that I was like, it'll be fine. But they offered me to like stay at their house, like, which was before Salida, but it was a few miles off the route. So I was like, "Yeah, I'll think about it." So they drive off. I continue on. Did this like dirt climb in the dark and pouring rain, and then I get to the top, and I was like, "Yeah, maybe I should stay at their place." And I pull out Google Maps, and I map to where their house is, and it's 6 miles from where I am, 3 miles off the route. Or Salida is 10 miles from where I am, like just down the pass. And it was Saturday night, but I had checked Google Maps, and it seemed like there were plenty of hotels available. So I'm like, I'll just go to Salida. So I get there. It's pouring rain. I'm like, all right, I'm going to stay at a hotel. I go to the street with all the hotels. All of them say no vacancy, like every single one. So I get out my like hotels.com app. There's one hotel available in the whole town. It was a Baymont Inn, so like just standard hotel. It was $260. But at that point, I just did not care. So I booked it. I went there. They initially gave me a room that hadn't been cleaned. So I had started taking all my stuff out, and then I'm like, "Oh, wait, the bed's not made. There are like towels in the bathtub." I go to the front desk. I'm like, "Hey, the room's not clean. I'm fine staying here if you give me a refund, you know, because I had spent $260. But they're like, "No, I'll give you a clean room." And I was like, "Damn it." But then luckily, like the next morning, I ate probably $50 worth of food at the free breakfast. And then I had to go to the bike shop, and Salida was a really cool town. I didn't spend much time in a lot of the towns, but I ended up spending a few hours in Salida. I went to Absolute Bikes. They were super amazing. They replaced my brake pads. They made my tire tubeless again after I had to replace that spoke. They were great. Yeah, Salida was cool. Yeah. Other highlights of Colorado. Oh yeah, the massive storm on the highest pass. So the highest the highest point of the route is Indiana Pass, which is the southernmost pass in Colorado. It's 11,900 feet. So, and it's like a 4,000 foot climb. So it's like high, and it's like one big climb. So I get to this town, Del Norte. It's spelled Del Norte, but it's pronounced Del Norte. Around 5 p.m., eat some food, and then start riding. And it's sunny, but of course I can see a massive storm on the top of the pass. So I keep riding. Eventually, it becomes gravel, and then I just like get into this massive thunder and lightning storm. And it hadn't started raining yet, but there was just thunder and lightning everywhere, like super close. And then it starts pouring rain, so I put literally all of my gear on. And then it starts hailing, and this picture on the bottom left is accumulated hail on the road. So like I was riding through an inch or two of hail. Like it's not snow, it's all hail. But honestly, that was one of the high points of the whole ride. Like I felt so alive at that point, and it was so incredible. I was like laughing. It was amazing. And then I get to the top of this pass right at sunset. So I'm still in the storm, but to my east is clear. So like the sun is shining through onto the mountains to my west, and there's a double rainbow, like full double rainbow. And then the tops of the hills were lit up. Like it was just incredible. It was one of the best sunsets I've ever seen. So then I started descending eventually, and it's getting dark. Well, it was dark, and I had planned on staying with these two guys from New Zealand at this, like, in an RV, at an RV park that they rented out or something. But there was another pass up that, so I ended up staying in this, like, abandoned cabin. I should have put a picture. But it was like, one of those abandoned cabins you see on the side of the road that, like, clearly has been abandoned for, like, 50 years. But I just go in there, and it had a concrete floor and a roof, so, yeah, I just slept in there, and it was fine. Yeah, so these pictures, the top left is maybe Dillon Reservoir or somewhere near there. The ride between Silverthorne and Salida was just super beautiful, despite having the broken spoke and seat post clamp that day. The top left is actually on that same day. That's the single track I was talking about, descending Boreas Pass, which was nice. It was pretty rocky and like slightly technical, but it was nice to mix it up and not just have, gravel everywhere. The bottom right picture is how everything looked all the time. So just, that's rain in the distance. Usually it was rain on me. But yeah, that was right between Salida and Sargent's, Colorado. Actually, that was another short day, just because it was so wet. Yeah, and then we've got the peanut butter mud and the hail. So that was Colorado. It was pretty incredible. Another high point of Colorado was I had come in from Wyoming, like my first day in Colorado was from Wamsutter on I-80 to Steamboat Springs. And I start climbing the first pass in Colorado, and there's this festival called the Rainbow Festival, which I learned later is kind of like Burning Man, but it's in the woods. So there are all these like kind of weird people, like super interesting. And I'm going through these like huge aspen groves, and again, like I'm just like laughing, like just super happy. I texted a bunch of my friends being like, "You guys are all amazing. This is the best thing ever. I love you all." So, yeah, it was pretty great. Yeah, so that is the whole route, and then I threw in at the end the food I ate, 'cause I figured people might be curious. So, I tried to eat a cooked or at least prepared meal about once a day. I say prepared 'cause I ate Subway a lot. There was one day where I ate Subway for dinner and then again for dinner, like 2 hours later. And then I actually got a sub for breakfast the next day, so that was pretty great. I normally never eat Subway, but Subway for rides like this is the best thing ever. Yeah, I ate a lot of like frozen breakfast burritos and breakfast sandwiches. So especially camping, I would get like one of those massive breakfast burritos that are frozen and then just put it in my bag, and then by the morning it was thawed. So I'd eat like a, lukewarm, really room temperature breakfast burrito or like a Jimmy Dean sandwich. I drank a lot of coffee, like a lot of coffee. So most days in the picture here, there's like a bottle. So that's like a Dunkin' Donuts, I don't know, mocha coffee thing. And I would get the Dunkin' Donuts one because it was in a plastic bottle, which I don't like using a lot of plastic. Unfortunately, this ride, you have to use a lot of plastic, but I didn't want to carry glass like those Starbucks Frappuccinos. So I did that. There were I brought Starbucks Via packets, thinking I would drink those, but I ended up sending my stove back pretty quickly. So There were a few times where, yeah, Mark's got it. I would fill my mouth with water and then dump the Via packet in my mouth and like swish it around and then swallow it. So you still get the coffee aftertaste. It's just not as enjoyable to drink. And then, yeah, I was very reliant on gas stations. Sometimes I would go to grocery stores and just get frustrated because they didn't have what I wanted. I did get a lot of like melon things. So on the bottom right, you can see my spork with some cantaloupe. I got a lot of those things at grocery stores, but generally I preferred gas stations. So like a lot of what I ate was peanut M&Ms, classic trail mix. Top tip: only get trail mix that has real M&Ms, not chocolate candies or chocolate morsels or whatever. Those things melt. They taste terrible. You got to get the real stuff, preferably Planters. Welch's Fruit Snacks. Shout out to TJ. Yeah. First ingredient's fruit. You get the vitamins. A lot of Twizzlers. Twizzlers were great because I would carry the bag in my jersey pocket, and I could just reach back and like grab them, whip them out. That was sweet. A lot of Kind bars, a lot of sandwich crackers, which like only cost $1 at the gas station, so those are pretty sweet. Belvita crackers, that's a Jack Doherty special. I would always have a jar of peanut butter. You can see in this picture there are 2 jars of peanut butter. So I had gone through the one and going on to the next one. Yeah, peanut butter is great because it's like a ton of calories. So if you just want, a bunch of calories, you just, take some scoops of peanut butter and eat them. That was pretty cool. Noon tablets directly on the tongue. That's a Glenn Adams top tip. So you don't put them in water. You just put them in your mouth, and they like fizz, and yeah, it's awesome. Oh, yeah. TJ said it's a hangover cure. Yeah. And then just random sports drinks. There's a new sports drink called Body Armor. I drank a bunch of that stuff. It's like 10% coconut water, and it's got way more electrolytes than Gatorade or Powerade, so that was pretty cool. And it's everywhere now, all of a sudden. So, yeah. That's it. I just want to thank a bunch of people. Aaron posted a fit for me before I went, so that was cool. Alan Strasberg was really key. He lent me the red brake shift levers and the brakes because I tried to get those. I tried to buy them. You cannot get that stuff right now. So he lent me his, which is incredible. Huge thanks to Alan. Austin, he just helped me out with random stuff in the R&D bike shop, as did TJ. Brian Gordon for getting me that frame, along with Miles. Chris Weehan, he got me the Control Carbon rims, and Victor built them, so big thanks to both of them. Doug lent me that my seat pack, and then he also gave me my little top tube bag, which is really cool. So thanks to Doug. Jesse for making that frame pack. That was actually Jesse's first frame pack that he ever made, which is pretty impressive because it did really well. Yeah, I was super glad to get it. He's getting a lot of orders now, so yeah, I'm glad I got the first one. Yeah, Miles, TJ, and Victor. Yeah, so yeah, thanks to everyone, and thanks for coming. Any questions? We're right at time, actually. I didn't think this would take that long. Yeah, I can't see anyone, so. Oh, I've done a lot of really long rides. So I've done a ride called Paris-Brest-Paris a couple times. So that's a 1,200K road ride, so like 756 miles in like 77 hours. So I've done that twice. I've done 1,000K and like a bunch of shorter stuff than that. Yeah, Paris-Brest-Paris, you have to qualify. So I plan on doing it next year. It's every 4 years. So you have to do a 2, 3, 4, and 600K the year of Paris-Brest-Paris by June to qualify. Chris asked, why drop bars? I've done longer stuff like this on flat bars, and Tour Divide is not a technical route at all. It's mostly gravel roads, so it's mostly just cruising. So I use drop bars just because on long rides I feel more comfortable with my hands in the position on the hoods. And then I went really wide so I could have a lot of control. So I ended up not really using the drops too much. I was in the hoods, even on kind of more technical descents, just because like I still felt really confident with my hands in that wide position. I also had aero bars on the bike, which I've never really used aero bars. Like I've never had a bike with aero bars, but I ended up using them all the time. Anytime I was just in a descent that I was coasting, I would get in them. And then toward the end of the route in New Mexico, there were a lot of just kind of straight, relatively flat sections. So I would just get in them and kind of go into like TT mode. Yeah, and then more hand positions like whoever MG is said. Yeah, that's another big benefit of the drop bars versus flat bars. Yeah, the shoes have the Expel material, but I don't know, it doesn't work. Mark. Oh yeah. Yeah, so I had bear spray. I only saw one grizzly bear, and it was actually the first day in Canada. Yeah, I was riding with another guy, and we kind of came around a corner, and there was a bridge over a river, and right next to the bridge there was a grizzly just standing there. It was pretty small, and we both of us stopped, and we got out our bear spray. He like took the guard off, like he was ready to spray the thing, and I was just like, I think we're okay. And it just walked away, and then we just crossed, and then I saw 3 or 4 black bears, but I would just be like, "Go away, bear," and they'd be like, "Huh?" And they like bounce away. So yeah. How many days is my goal for next year? So, uh, I kind of want to go back and like try to go really fast. This time is my first time doing it. I had a pretty conservative goal, but having done it now, like I would like to try to go like I don't know around like 15 days around the like winning time, but we'll see. TJ, I placed 27th overall. Yeah. I don't know how many finished. The last time I checked, there were like 70 people who had scratched, so like a lot of people didn't finish. Um, yeah, like the guy I rode with, Jeremiah, he ended up scratching in Salida. He was like emotionally exhausted because it's a lot. Yeah. Uh, if someone were to want to do a single state, which would you recommend? Colorado or Montana. Probably Colorado. In terms of like scenery and variation of terrain and all that, like Colorado was pretty incredible. TJ. Saddle sores? Yeah. So yeah, a little background. I actually started Tour Divide with saddle sores. Yeah, so that was fun. My plan was to race with no chamois, which is a big mistake. So I was training with no chamois, just wearing like synthetic underwear, and saddle sores started like developing slowly. I've never had saddle sores ever before. So I was like, oh man. And then in 4 weeks before the start, I did a like 3-day, 250-mile bike pack trip to Big Sur, and they got really bad on that. So then I basically didn't ride for the 4 weeks before the start of Tour Divide, trying to, get rid of them. But they were still there slightly, and then throughout the Tour Divide, like I ended up using a chamois, and I used this stuff called Lantiseptic, which if you want to do long distance riding of any type, Lantiseptic is the best like chamois cream. It's made for people with incontinence to prevent like bed sores, and like it just stays on. So I used that, but they still got pretty bad. So I ended up just taking like 1 dose of ibuprofen in the morning, and that would make it tolerable throughout the day. And they're pretty much gone now. So yeah. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Sh- Shep asked if it was difficult to breathe. So the ride started at 4,000 feet, which was kind of nice because it's not, too crazy elevation because I live at sea level. So, but then, you do a lot of climbing and you really gradually got up to Colorado, which is like 9 or 10,000 feet. So by the time I was there, it was fine. Like I was used to the elevation. Yeah, so it was never an issue. All right, cool. Thanks everyone.